Hey, how's it going? It's your boy Challenger Coach Adam Warrior Dials here to bring you the 10.6 High-ELO tier list, so let's jump right into it. In the top lane, our starting S tier roster will be Jax, Wukong, Set, Renekton, Fiora, Aatrox, and Camille. For our changes to the list, we've got Tryndamere going from B tier to A tier, Sylas is going to be added to B tier as he's becoming a more viable solo laner in general, Kalista to B tier, but played at your own risk, as normally this isn't the kind of champion top laners are good at, I'm just saying. We also have Darius moving from S tier to A tier as the nerfs did actually hurt his laning phase, but more importantly, just created a gap between him and actually overpowered monkey top lane champs. Then we also cleared up the list a bit and shouted around some of the underplayed champions like Rengar and Zac. Speaking of monkey champions, Wukong goes from as far off the list as humanly possible to S tier god status in a single patch, which likely is the biggest jump a champion has made this entire season. If you want the full details on the champion, feel free to check out our guide, but to dish out some stats on him, he currently sits at a 60% win rate at Masters Plus with a 11% play rate and a 45% ban rate, with those numbers being roughly the same at Diamond Plus but a 55% win rate instead, technically making him the strongest top laner in the game. But Adam, didn't he get hotfix nerfs? Surely his numbers would go down once the data comes in from that. Well, funny enough is that even though he did get hotfix nerfs, those were offset by two hotfixes that were actually really good for him. The Q bug, where it wasn't actually implying the bonus damage on towers, and then the second most important bug fix was that his clone wasn't dealing damage to champions or towers pretty much half the time, meaning, yeah, even though his numbers got nerfed a little bit, the clone damage being added back in just completely offsets that, which makes him kind of the highest picker ban priority in solo queue until he's nerfed, so definitely pick him up. Our next change to the top lane list will be Aatrox moving from A tier to S tier. He's been a high priority pick in competitive play for quite some time, but didn't really have the solo queue stats to back it up. But with the recent changes to Death's Dance having a positive impact on his win rate, along with him being one of the only, kind of blind pickable champions in the pit of Counterpick Island, which is the new name for top lane, we thought it's about time to move Aatrox up. With the added survivability of Death's Dance, Aatrox is now able to out-sustain fights even easier than before, causing him to be even safer of a pick, which is incredibly valuable in Counterpick Island, as you never know when someone's going to try and pick a melee champ counter like Vayne, Lucian, Kalista, or Quintop, and then your jungler never helps you out. Last up for top lane, we have a champion who's quickly joining the meta again thanks to her new build, and that's Aurelia. Many bruiser players are actually catching on now how absurd Bork is as a first item, even delaying Trinity Force or Black Cleaver for it, and it's currently pretty optimal on champions like Jax or Aurelia, and even Set is trying out this build. The reason it's so good on Aurelia in particular is her synergy with attack speed is top notch. It gives her enough lane sustain to make up for the lack of tankiness that she lost from not having a phage, but more importantly, and I can't stress this enough, the active makes her easy mode. Aurelia is a champion where if you get hit by the stun, you're probably gonna die, but people, especially in High-ELO, are pretty good at avoiding it, but when you just Q to a minion, Bork active them, and then land the stun while they're slowed, it opens up a lot more engage options. My favorite though is when you dodge the stun even though you got slowed by Bork, and then she auto-attacks you down with Bork autos and you die anyways. It's a really fun build. In the mighty jungle, our starting S tier roster will be Olaf, Karthus, Graves, Elise, Echo, Rek'Sai, and Lead Singa. For the jungle changes, we've got Graves going to S tier, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise. We got Wukong going to A tier, as he's just that broken at the moment, but expect him to drop fast once he's nerfed, as he really doesn't perform well as a jungler in High-ELO to begin with. We got Jankos moving from B tier to A tier, Sejuani, as well as Gragas, who are both very popular competitive picks who've been doing better in solo queue recently due to all the AD melee solo laners. Kindred, as predicted, will be moving from B tier to A tier post buffs, as her early game clear and slightly better scaling has really helped her out, with full AP Amumu funny enough making the High-ELO list as a champion who historically never appears here but now has the stats to back it up. The little mummy was hard stuff for like 10 years, but man, he finally made it. After that, we moved the Charmander down from S tier to A tier, as the other S tiers were just better at carrying than he is. We moved Shyvana and Nunu down from A tier to B tier due to lower play rates, but you might see them back up in A tier soon. And then we just took out some of the trash of the Shadow Realm like Xin Zhao, Ivern, and Set Jungle. Our next change of the list will be moving Olaf from A tier to S tier. Olaf is just a jungle champion that tends to move up and down on tier lists pretty quickly, as he's incredibly meta dependent. If it's an early game meta and he's got good matchups, then he's pretty much a god, but if some of those matchups disappear or the game start lasting a little longer, then he kinda sucks, and I don't think there's a single champion that is worse than Olaf post 30 to 35 minutes. I actually think he might be the worst champion. Thankfully for Olaf though, not only is this an early game skirmish meta in solo queue, but Sejuani and Gragas coming back into the meta helps him add a lot more solid matchups to his repertoire, although Graves coming back does kinda suck for him. But this can kind of be counterbalanced by how absurdly broken Olaf Yuumi is, which is actually an extremely popular combo in High-ELO as it extends the time frame of usefulness for Olaf, as it's just one of those combos where if you lose to Olaf in the early game and give him a slight lead, it's kind of donezo after that, and since it's Olaf, he's pretty much going to win the early game. Our next champion to highlight will be Karthus, who is kind of the complete opposite of Olaf. Karthus is one of the champions who's been S tier in solo queue since the beginning of the season, and yet doesn't get enough hate from the community in my opinion. He's the best scaling jungler, and simply just AFK farms and uses ult to just increase his income passively, and then he just outperforms any other jungler in the teamfight phase, and that play pattern is pretty disgusting, leaving him only 3 real losing matchups in Rek'Sai, Rengar, or Kha'Zix. And I say real losing matchups because Eve is technically a counter, but then you're stuck playing Eve, so it's really not worth it. Not to mention, you know he's a bit broken if he can even carry Tyler 1. I'm kidding. Tyler actually has a pretty diverse champion pool. I've been impressed, but seriously, the point stands that Karthus has been used to farm camps NLP for way too long without a nerf, and I for one am tired of seeing him pick up free wins versus autofilled Lee Sin players who end up 100 CS down in 10 minutes. Last up for the jungle, we have Taliyah moving from B tier to A tier. Somewhat similarly to Gragas or Sejuani, Taliyah is a major beneficiary of the increase in AD solo laners, especially because this meta is very CC heavy. This means a common play pattern for Taliyah is to just walk up to mid lane, Pantheon will stun the enemy Talon, then boop, easy combo, one shot, then you surf your way down to bot lane, your Leona engages for you, gives you about 7 seconds of free time to go grab a drink of water, then come back to land your combo, boop another kill, followed by you surfing and ulting your way to top lane, only to find your top laner dead to Wukong, so you just go back to farming. That seems like a pretty standard Taliyah game, and Taliyah right now is quite a strong pick, as her map mobility allows her to show up to all the random early game duels or skirmishes that tend to happen right now, while the increase in CC or AD champions gives her way more reliable damage in fights, as landing her combos easier or itemizing versus her becomes harder. Moving down to the mid lane, our S tier starting roster will be Talon, Syndra, Sylas, Katarina, Zoe, and LeBlanc. For the changes to the list, we have Sylas moving from A tier to S tier as more and more people start to realize how broken he actually is during the mid to late game, and he currently is a very common ban in the LPL. Irelia moves from the Shadow Realm to A tier this patch thanks to her new Bork Cleaver Wits End build, making the champion not as terrible. Then we added a bunch of viable B tier champions like Ziggs, Galio, Lucian, and Nivea, and even Taliyah. We also moved Diana and Kiana out of S tier to A tier, as there are 2 assassin picks who are performing worse than the other S tier ones, just slightly, while Aesol is being sent from A tier to B tier. One of the other reasons we actually moved Kiana down is, at least in solo queue, Talon is doing her job as spam roaming without actually landing, but just better. The man currently holds a 55% win rate in Diamond Plus compared to Kiki's 52, and similar play rates, and the weird thing about Talon is, he's been like this for like 2 seasons now without receiving any real nerfs. In fact, the itemization update to lethality only helped him out even more, not to mention Talon's become stronger as of late with the addition of his new Conqueror setup, which statistically is doing better than his normal Electrocute one in High-ELO, and they even have around the same pick rate. So just imagine if everyone swapped over to Conqueror, his win rate would go up even more, and then maybe he might get looked at, because I don't know about you, but it isn't that fun to play versus a champion who one-shots you with half your CS and then never lanes. But well, since it isn't very likely that he gets nerfed too hard anytime soon, kind of like the other melee assassins, Diana, Fizz, Katarina, let me introduce you to my boy Pantheon to counter all your melee assassin problems. He's not that popular of a pick in the West, but over in Asia, Pantheon mid lane is extremely popular as a counter pick to any melee mid laners, which is kind of over half the roster in High-ELO. Not only is Pantheon able to bully them during the laning phase due to his Q spam, but he's incredibly safe versus them thanks to his E being able to block all of their burst damage or trade combos, which means he kinda just wins the lane by default. Normally it's at this point in time when the Talon player loses lane that he'll just randomly roam to bot lane hoping to pick up a couple of kills, but this doesn't actually work against Pantheon, as his ultimate is able to match the pathetic roam attempts of his victims, followed by him outplaying them with a targeted stun, making him a perfect counter to the meta, hence his A tier placement. Our last highlight for the mid lane list will actually be LeBlanc. LeBlanc is just one of those champions that almost every single High-ELO mid laner who isn't a one-trick will have in their champion pool whenever she's viable, as her ability to outplay her opponents and make them just look straight up dumb is likely one of the best out of any mid laner. The important part to remember about LeBlanc though in this meta is her synergy with the jungle roster. Most of the top tier jungle champions are things like Rek'Sai, Lee Sin, or Olaf who look to fight early and skirmish and make plays around the map, and let me tell you, there is almost no way to outplay LeBlanc Lee Sin ganks or in a 2v2, meaning when she is paired with an aggressive jungler, LeBlanc's lane priority is unmatched in the mid lane as her kill threat and early impact becomes way too large to handle. Now, of course, you could try and outscale her with control mages or whatever, but you know, it's solo queue, so you gotta pick Shyvana jungle and then contest Lee Sin LeBlanc on Scuttle at level 3 and die. For the bot lane S tier roster, we have Misfortune, Lucian, Kai'Sa, Ezreal, and Kalista. For the bot lane changes, we have Yasuo moving from B tier to A tier as a very viable bot lane carry since actual ADCs don't really have impact in the early game while he does. Veigar, thanks to his buffs, has been added to B tier as a viable mage option, while Xayah at a high level is really only A tier when paired with Rakan, but by herself, her stats kinda suck, so we moved her down to B tier. We also have Senna dropping from S tier to the Shadow Realm post nerfs, but I'll talk a little bit more about her in the support section where she belongs. Varus, thanks to his new build style options, will be moving from A tier to S tier. You can still go his old Bork style when you need to shred some tanks, but currently his highest win rate and quickly becoming his most popular style of build is his Legolas Lethality poke build. It's pretty simple and much easier to use than his normal one, as all you really need to do is rush Humble Glaive into Ghostblade than other lethality items, take Comet for extra poke, or sometimes lethal tempo, then you hear me out on this one, alright? You're gonna spam poke people with your Q, and that's pretty much the build. This build, especially if you snowball though, which is likely because it's more lane dominant, will kill people in 2 Qs and can easily one rotation non-tank champions in a single ultimate. The reason why this build is easier is pretty simple. It doesn't require you to know how to auto attack or space properly since you're mostly playing like a caster mage sniping people out for half their HP with one skill shot, and FYI, this build always gets nerfed when it's meta, so use now before this offer expires. So next up, we have an ADC people like to complain is bad, but due to his recent nerfs, he is moving from B tier to A tier, and that's Draven. I'll acknowledge that he's on the lower end of A tier, but the buffs to his movement speed did actually impact his win rate by a decent amount, as the extra movement speed on an aggressive champion like him can be extremely valuable. That extra move speed allows him to step forward to dodge skill shots and chase people down easier for axe poke, or get in range to use stand aside to score some kills in the laning phase, which allows him to snowball early on much easier, or even escape ganks when needed. Of course, he's still got that huge issue where his teamfight DPS versus frontline comps is absolute trash, but this buff allowed him to snowball during the laning phase quickly enough to where those type of fights don't end up happening as often. Lastly, we have Aphelios dropping from S tier to A tier on the bot lane list. The repeated rounds of nerfs has hit this champion pretty hard, and although his play rate and ban rate are still quite high, this is likely just leftover sentiment from how absurdly broken he's been and the hatred for his visual clarity. We still think he's incredibly strong and would be the top ranker in A tier, but the nerfs have hurt his win rate far too much to be compared to some of the other monster S tier champions like Misfortune for us to have him in the same tier as her for solo queue. Now, is Aphelios still worth playing? Yeah, of course he is. Will he see competitive play still? Absolutely. But having a negative win rate in Diamond Plus along with a 52% win rate in Master Plus is just not S tier material compared to MF at a 57% win rate in Master Plus with a higher play rate, or Ezreal's 54% win rate with also a higher play rate. And lastly, our support S tier roster will be Leona, Bard, Yuumi, and the Thresh Prince. Our changes to the list include moving in some B tier champions like Soraka and also Lamau Kai, who is a popular Korean and Chinese solo queue pick who I personally believe will end up in A tier pretty soon, and then we also shout around Lux as well. That means that our first highlight for support will be the single best support champion stat-wise in High-ELO, and if you guessed Thresh, Yuumi, or Leona, you're wrong because it's actually Bard. Albardo currently is holding an 8% pick rate and 54% win rate in Diamond Plus with a 58% win rate and 13% pick rate in Masters Plus. He is just currently the best support to invest time into if you want to climb in solo queue. This champion is just simply a monstrous playmaker at any point in the game. He can make a big play to win the game. In the laning phase, through roams, getting picks, engaging in teamfight, disengaging in teamfight, solo and killing people with meeps, he can literally do it all, and his versatility is what makes him so good. My boy Brad's even got a carry style build where you can go dead man's rapid fire cannon and run around like an idiot, too tanky to die but doing too much auto damage to be ignored, or he can just go his regular utility setup with Redemption Athenes if he wants to pretend to be a real enchanter support, which he's not. Next up, I wanted to talk about a champion you probably didn't know had a 5% pick rate in High-ELO on support, and so we added him to B tier, and that's set support. The way it works is you run at people and then you stun them, and then you use your broken W. I know it doesn't sound too amazing, but then you remember you're set, and support income is actually pretty good, making him still a very good champion in terms of game impact. The real reason it works so well though is he has some pretty good synergy with some of the popular ADC choices. For starters, he is an amazing option for the fasting Senna strat. Next up, he works really well with Kalista, as landing a single E is probably a kill, and then it also allows him to engage easier because of the Kalista ultimate. And lastly, Set works extremely well for setting up a really solid wombo combo with Misfortune. Trust me when I say this, I know he sounds like a really big troll support, but he is just that strong of a champion that that, he can actually be a pretty good carry option in the support role, even if it's a little off meta. Lastly, for the 10.6 patch, I wanted to talk about Senna, who is moving down from S tier to A tier, but also was removed completely from the ADC list. This is because post-nerfs, her normal non-fasting Senna bot lane stats are below 1% pick rate in High-ELO with around a 50% win rate, or kind of slightly below that, meaning she is barely viable or even picked without using that strat after the nerfs. As for why we moved her down from S tier in the support role despite her being very strong in terms of stats and pick rate, that's due to some issues with the way stat sites are actually collecting her data right now. Pretty much what's happening is when the fasting Senna strat of having her support farm while she harasses early game is used, she gets slotted in as a support, which is greatly inflating her actual stats and win rate. Because of this, we decided to slightly downgrade her as an actual support option while removing her from the ADC list, as it would be almost the same as including Taric as a mid laner at this point. Very effective, but it's only used in one particular strategy. But anyways, rip bot lane Senna, you're not gonna be missed. That's it folks, thanks for watching our 10.6 High-ELO tier list. Be sure to check out our other content on this channel or at mobalytics.gg. As always, I'm the Napoleon of League of Legends, Adam Moriarty Isles. May the old and new solo queue gods be with you.